Welcome to today's webinar hosted by Alation with Avista. We'll be talking today about treating data like an asset. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Stephanie McReynolds, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Marketing here at Alation. And I'm pleased to host today Pat Deaver, who's the Chief Data Strategist at Avista. Pat has been central to Avista's initiative to both create a data culture and treat data as an asset. He set a very high bar to curate 100% of Avista's data. This includes their customer, financial, geospatial, and energy trading data, amongst other data sources in their business. Pat has a breadth of knowledge about those sources, having been with Avista for over 13 years, and he's held several roles there, including managing their application systems and IT development. Prior to Avista, he was an independent consultant on technology strategy and software development cycle processes. And so I'm very pleased to hand the reins of the webinar today over to Pat to get started, to tell us a little bit about how he started down the path of adopting a data catalog to help treat data as an asset at his company. Pat, I'll hand over to you to get started.
Good morning, everyone. This is Pat Deaver, Chief Data Strategist with Avista Utilities. Today, we're going to speak about the strategic use of data and how Avista has positioned ourselves to utilize data as a strategic asset to drive business results. First, a little bit about Avista. We are an energy company involved in the production, transmission, and distribution of energy in the form of electricity and gas. You can see our service territory is in eastern Washington, northern Idaho, and parts of southern and northeastern Oregon. We also have a subsidiary utility in Alaska, in Juneau, that is independently run and operated. Our main company has about 395,000 electric customers and 362,000 gas customers. So now let's talk about how Avista is transforming data into value. So the key here is data alone is an asset. It's valuable and it's actually renewable. It can be used for multiple purposes over and over, and it never ever goes away. And so how do we use that and turn that data into value? So let's take a look at the vision that we have. And the vision is to use data beyond its originally intended use to gain business value. And when I talk about using data beyond its original intended use, is simply applications are used throughout our businesses to capture data, whether it's about customer operations or financial information about our company, and those are for purpose-built applications and data sets. So how do we leverage those data sets separately or even combined to gain new insights into data, which then brings greater value to our businesses? So we have branded and trademarked a term called D&A-IQ, and that is simply data and analytics intelligence. And we believe that branding this for our company is important to become something real and something that can be interpreted and viewed as an asset. So we have the data ingredients, which are the data sets from the various applications. We have, and the application is not just internally to the organization, but also external data. We have the analytics that does the transformation of the data, algorithms that will do some calculations, some predictive analysis, and then the insights. So we have been running this program for 3 years, actually about 2.5 years. We started in 2017. And you can see the rate in which our use cases are increasing. And those are driven predominantly from our business, and they are targeted at our strategic initiatives, which include our customers, our people, which would be our employees, to perform and to invent. So those are key tenets in the strategies for our company. So Gartner, Doug Laney, many of you may have spoke with him or heard of him. He's a VP and Distinguished Analyst for Gartner. Says most companies have a latent asset that isn't being measured or managed well, which means it's not offering an optimal level of economic benefit. And this is what it's all about, is to take that latent asset and to leverage it to drive benefit, whether it's in customer experience, operational efficiencies, or monetizing that data in some cases. So I'm going to share with you now some specific use cases that we're working on in the utility industry. So all of us are consumers of energy, and so this should be familiar with us. We have power needs on a daily basis. And the interesting thing about our power usage is there are peaks of usage and off-peak usage. So peaks of usage simply means that it's the time that we wake up in the morning, we take our showers, which kicks on the hot water heater, we might cook breakfast, which kicks on the microwave or other appliances. The lights come on in the house, so we have an increase in usage of energy. And then we are all off to work, and maybe at lunch we have another peak, and then definitely when we come home from work, because we are coming home for dinner, we're coming home to relax in the evening, watching TV, lights are on, we have an increased use. And so the interesting thing to our customers is to understand what they are using that power for. And we call that disaggregation of consumption, where your meter on your house will capture your usage. In some cases, it's simply a monthly usage that the utility captures. In some cases, it's daily. In some cases, it's hourly, depending on the technology and the meter you have. But beyond that, what is interesting about how you're using that power? And it's still fairly early in the process of doing it. There are technologies out there that connect to your power box that help to do this, but we're thinking about doing it with data, and we're looking at different frequencies and characteristics about the electricity to help provide you as a customer better information about your usage. Now, where this might be helpful is to help you understand the impact that an aging furnace or an aging air conditioner or any aging appliance will have on your consumption, therefore allowing you to make better decisions about how you use your energy. Another use case that we are working on is around electric vehicles and distributed generation. And electric vehicles, of course, we're all familiar with, are becoming more and more available and cost-effective for us to invest in, and the distance that they can travel is increasing, making them a more viable option for us as consumers when we're buying vehicles. But when you think about the distribution grid, which is what we use to deliver electricity, the load that those EVs, electric vehicles, will introduce is something new, something that we didn't necessarily contemplate over the last 125 years as we built our distribution systems. And so the wire size that delivers power to your home and across the feeder, the type and size of transformer that is there feeding your house and your neighbors' homes might not be sized appropriately, especially if EV adoption becomes widespread. So what we're concerned about and what we're investigating is what is going to be the impact on our system as more and more EVs are adopted into our population. In addition, we have distributed generation that we have to be concerned about, and that's in the form of primarily solar rooftops and wind. But in the neighborhoods, it's primarily solar. And so how do we recognize the impact of additional generation coming onto our distribution system and the impact on the physical characteristics of that distribution system at the same time as EVs are coming on, creating greater load? So let's look at the actual use case that we performed to make some predictions about the EV impact on our system. So you can see that because in Washington State, we primarily have monthly analog meters. And what that means is our meters are not digital for the most part today. They're analog, and we collect monthly reads. And so we did have one area in red that is in Pullman that we do have AMI meters in. And in the AMI meters, we're able to collect 5-minute data. So we used the area in red on the map to sample and determine what the 6 different load shapes of our customers would be that we could then apply against our broader territory, which has the analog older type meters. And so we took our existing customer data from the Pullman area. We knew what our assets in that area were, and we blended that with external demographic data about those customers. And what that did is gave us a customer profile that would allow us to apply 6 different load shapes to. What we did then is we ran a Monte Carlo analysis to distribute the predictive model across our analog customers, those that we get monthly usage for, to determine what the impact might be. And so this was a fairly complex use case using both our existing data and our third-party data to come up with the 6 different load shapes, apply them against our customers in non-digital technology meter areas. And we will then use this information in our planning for future growth in our territory. We have another use case that we're working on for identifying those customers that are at high risk to become homeless. And in any area of the country, we have those that struggle day in and day out to pay their bills, whether it be their energy bill, their food bill, their gas bill. And so what we want to do is help our customers by getting out in front of that to ensure that they are connected with programs that assist them in their financial need. And so we have our customer data, which we have historic usage patterns. We have third-party data that we've incorporated into that, and we've included things like income, education, household size, credit rating. We also have information about their service agreement or their type of service they have with us, whether it's residential, commercial, gas, or electric, and how long they've been a customer. So we take that data and then we determine a baseline for each customer. We've got this third-party data that we incorporate, which gives us about 600 attributes on customers that helps us learn more about them. And then we run the algorithm to identify those that are at higher risk of potentially becoming homeless. And what we do with that information is then connect those customers with our low income programs. We work with them on payment arrangements, and we also provide home energy audits and assistance. And so the intent here is to identify the needs of the customers, get out in front of those that are most in need, and connect them with our services. Now I'm going to talk about some of the tools that we use to achieve the use cases that we just described. So about 2 years ago, I decided that we needed to get something that allowed us to see what data we had. You know, we know that we've got a lot of data across the enterprise, but how do we know where it is, what it is, who has access, and those that know most about the data, how do we get that information into a usable state for all analysts across the company? And so we engaged in a selection process for a metadata management tool. We shortlisted the vendors using Gartner to assist us. And we brought 2 vendors in. One of them was Alation, and we engaged over 150 people in these 2-hour demonstrations. And we provided these 150 people with certain questions to rank the vendors on. So 120 business analysts actually filled out the questionnaires, but we also wanted to know a little bit more about how those analysts were using data. And so this picture on your screen shows the questions we asked and the answers that they provided. And this gave us an indication of the maturity of our organization as it relates to using technical tools. It gave us an indication of how much time they're spending on locating data, cleaning data, and actually doing the analysis of data. And you can see that that's a key one. Only 49% of their time was being used to analyze data. And so the challenge that I was presented with is, how do I move that to a 60 or 70 or 80% of their time analyzing data and less time locating and cleansing data? So this was a great exercise engaging the business in the selection, also assisted in the change management process, which I'm going to talk about here in a minute. But understanding what your customers need, and customers, I'm speaking about internal employees, need to do their job as an analyst is key. So here is what we did. We selected Alation as our tool, and this was, like I said, 150 analysts participated in that selection. We implemented it in the last part of December of 2018 and went live in January of this year. The strategy was to curate or identify all of the data across the enterprise over this 1 year period. And so we started in January, and we have a plan to curate all of our data this year. Now you can see that we have about 94,000 columns of data in the system today. And those data points come from our main systems: customer information system, work and asset management system, our outage management system, and our financial system. And so we're going to look at a chart here in a minute that shows our status on where we're at in our strategy. But the key is the thing I'm trying to share here is that really the goal is to curate the data and make it available. Also, I wanted to show here is in the lower section of the screen, which are kind of user-defined areas within Alation, you can see some quick links. You got quick links for data stewards and quick links. There's another, if you come in as an analyst, you have quick links for analysts. And so these are common things that people need to understand. For example, how do I get to my data sources? Or how do I get to my Tableau or Cognos systems that allow me to search data in them? Or what types of queries, simple queries, can I access? And so those are just quick links to other pages within the Alation system that has those capabilities. Also, we have a learning and governance link over here. The learning takes us to some canned recordings, video recordings that we did that simply help individuals learn how to do real basic things within Alation. The governance, of course, is more extensive as it relates to our information governance policies, the roles and responsibilities, the data classifications, the privacy standards and policies. So it's easily available for analysts to see what they can and cannot do with the data. So I talked about curation, and this is an important term. Curating data is the process of identifying and describing what that data is. And as I said, our strategy was to curate 100% of our data in 2019. And so curation leads to adoption. So as a technology group, which as a chief data strategist, I am within the technology umbrella of the company. But when a technology group leads, they need to lead from behind the curtain. And what I mean there is really the business needs to lead and the technology needs to support. Because if you've got it the other way around, you're going to lose that interest in the business. And so how did we achieve that? Well, we took one large data set at a time, for example, the customer information system, and we identified the data stewards and the data owners and the analysts within that domain of data. And we engaged them directly, helping to understand what their needs were, helping them to understand what the tool and capabilities were. And then we established 1-hour meetings in a conference room once a week for a period of 6 weeks. And we had about 8 or 10 people in there with their laptops, and we went through the process of curating data. And as I said, that's simply identifying a field in a table that might say cust_ID and putting a business-friendly term on it, customer account number. And so that's the process of curation. Now, Alation does have some machine learning capabilities that actually probably about 50% or greater of those business-friendly terms are identified through their machine learning algorithms, but that still leaves another 50% that need to be curated from a business standpoint. So we started curating our data in January. We did our financial, our geospatial, we did our customer asset management. We're now working on our energy trading and risk management, but the strategy is to have 100% done by the end of the year. Now, while curating, we had analysts, developers in the room, as I stated before. And here's just a quick note on something that interesting that happened. Maximo is an asset management system from IBM. We had 2 senior developers adding queries to the system. As they were sharing information, one of the developers learned that, hey, you mean there's a pre-existing view that held the information that he was writing the query for, and he's been here probably 10 or more years, but really didn't know something that the other developer did know. And so even the most seasoned of your staff is going to gain insights and knowledge about this through this system. I have a couple of testimonials that I'd like to share just from my own company. One of our senior engineering business analysts shared that it was like having a data engineer available at his fingertips, and it allowed him to focus on data science versus trying to identify, locate, and curate the data. So what he's talking about here is using Alation to actually search for data, identify what it is, where it is, so that he can immediately take his analytic tools, point to that data set, and use it. And so that's the experience that he had. One of our business analysts in our customer service group stated, what I found was amazing. I did a search for town and found the query with descriptions for these character types. I was able to look at the code and apply it to my report where it was needed. So here's another example of an analyst that really didn't know what the character types of the town data set was able to quickly find it and apply it to her data set. Change management, that's a big deal. Organizational change management is probably the most important thing when it comes to implementing a system like this. I always take a position that, you know, the technology works. So Alation works. And the challenge is, you know, if we build it, will they use it? And it really isn't so much about building it, it's about using it. We know the technology works, so how do we get the business engaged? And Um, the thing that I state is that 90% of the challenge is organizational change management, business process, business change, and 10% is technology. The technology works. How do you get the business to engage and adopt it? And how do you do this? Well, that's a challenge. Communicating value, what does it mean to each individual employee? You really have to take it down to that level as you're putting these systems in. You have to understand and ask the questions and take the position of the person that you want to use the system. How will it affect my job? What value will it bring to me? And why would I use this tool? I already have what I need. Those are all common themes, and it's important that you take the time to ask and answer those questions for your staff. If they don't understand that, then it's going to be very difficult for them to adopt a new tool. Here's our schedule for our enterprise. You can see the darker ones in Q1 and Q2, which are complete. We've got our nucleus energy trading and risk management databases in process. We've got some other ones that are in the queue, and there are some out here that we may or may not do, and it's really driven by the business. We've got, for example, our tracker system at the very tail end. That's our current work management system, and that's for the technology work management system. Would we want to capture that information? Yet to be defined. But those are ones on the roadmap today. That roadmap changes frequently based on the business drivers, but it gives you a sense of how much time we're spending with each application to do the curation. Now let's just share some results of what we've done by finding data and exposing it. We use Cognos as our business intelligence and reporting tool. And you can see here that we've got some meter health checks. We are in the process of deploying AMI, that's the digital meters, across the state of Washington to replace those analog meters I referred to earlier in the EV use case. And so this is giving you a sense of how we're doing in that. We've got a tool called Alteryx, which allows us to do business data scientist type work. This is a really great tool, and this is an algorithm, a graphical representation of the algorithm for the homeless customers. And finally, Tableau. And this is one that we put together to identify driving patterns so that we can incorporate some positive feedback or corrective feedback to employees that may be overrunning the speed limit. Okay, so now we are going to turn this over, and I know we were having a little bit of audio problem before. I'm not sure
I should be back.
Oh, very good, Stephanie. So I'm going to just turn this over to you right now.
Excellent. Thank you, Pat. And as everyone on the phone can tell, Pat's been central to Avista's initiatives to both create a data culture and treat data as an asset. So thank you so much, Pat, for sharing some of your best practices. There are quite a few questions that have come in. I do have some additional content to share as to what we see in other industries outside of electricity and gas. But there's so many questions that have come in, Pat. I'd like to pause for just a few minutes and maybe address a couple of those, and then if we don't get to everyone's now, I'll present a few slides and we'll address the rest at the end of the webinar, if that's all right with you, Pat.
Yeah, that works great. Great.
So one of the questions that came in was about the learning curve on Alation. This individual was interested in what is the average onboarding time for a new staff member, and how has Alation changed that process of onboarding?
Sure. So when we implemented Alation, part of their product offering was a quick start or a 1-week training, and they came on site and provided training for about 10 or 12 of my staff. And those few days of training were all it took to get us going. From there, we started leading the training for our users, and we started developing recordings, video recordings for training for our users. It's a very intuitive system. Most analysts can sit right down and begin to use it as far as finding data. It's a Google-like search. It brings up the most widely used. If you typed in customer, it's going to bring up all instances of customer that it finds. Very intuitive. So I would say the learning curve is less than 1 week, and for most of the analysts that we are now engaged with, we start out in those 1-hour sessions for 6 weeks. That first session, which is only 1 hour, is the training, and then it launches them. And so I don't know if that answers the question completely, but the initial investment was about a week, and then I invest an hour with our analysts, getting them up to speed and letting them loose on the system.
Excellent. We had a couple other tactical questions about setup and how to get started. So I see a pattern here of people who are interested in finding out what does it take to get started with Alation. So one of those questions is, what does it take in terms of the infrastructure, getting Alation up and running in the enterprise? How much effort did that take for your team?
That was very straightforward for us. Now, Alation offers a cloud-based solution in Amazon. I'm not sure about other cloud vendors, and they also offer an on-premise. We did the on-premise version. It required a couple of servers, one for production, one for test. They were probably medium-sized servers, and the entire implementation from getting the hardware installed to going live was about a 2-week period. Now, the curation, not the curation, but the procurement of the hardware, took 4 or 6 weeks and to get it set up. But as far as getting that application on the system and making it available, it was about 2 weeks. And we tend to want to learn how to do that. So our team did most of the work with support from Alation, and now we support and maintain that platform ourselves. We've got the support team from Alation that may get involved from time to time, but predominantly we do it ourselves.
Excellent. I think that certainly answers that question, Pat. Thank you. We'll fit one more in, and I think that was also targeted towards resources and what does it really take to get a project as broad as yours up and running. And so this question was focused on data stewards. How many data stewards you have guiding the curation? What are they specifically documenting? Titles and descriptions, if you can give just a little bit more detail there. We had a couple questions along those lines.
Sure. So the interesting thing about curation and data stewards is, at least in our organization, they already existed in an informal state. And what I did was to make that more formal. And so as we went across each of those major systems, I identified those individuals that were already doing that type of work. And so it wasn't necessarily new work, it was just recognizing the work that they were doing. So, for example, in the customer information system, we have 9 information stewards identified. Now, those are not new individuals; those were existing individuals, and about a third of those were on the technical development team, and 2/3 were in the business. In our asset management system, we have 7 identified, and about half and half there, business versus technical. So these are jobs that already exist, and it's interesting how these individuals are engaged and interested in this because they can see the value. They are the ones that are either getting the questions on where do I find this, or what does this mean, or they're asking the questions. And so to be able to show them the capability of self-service and find this information was incredible. They bought in right away. Also, as far as the curation, the column names, obviously data field names are a little bit cryptic sometimes. So curating a business-friendly name. We did a lot of business articles with terms and maybe process and descriptions that are common. We probably have, we have hundreds of documents, and they could just be one paragraph or one page description of something that is frequently asked by analysts. Also, the table descriptions, we put a brief description, not extensive, on the table to say this is the customer table that holds the billing address. There may be other tables that have billing address information, but we will identify those core tables that are, and then we'll identify those tables that are not and link the analyst. You can link within Alation to the table that may hold essentially the system of record for the address. And so we also added some queries, simple queries. This is not an analytics tool. This is a tool to discover data, but there is capabilities. There's a built-in SQL tool called Compose that allows you to write and execute SQL, providing you have the right credentials to get to the data. And you can do, complex SQL or simple SQL. We've limited it to simple SQL. How many customers do we have in Washington? How many customers do we have in Idaho? Those types of queries. So that's another form of curation as well. And so it's really what you want to do with it. And when I talk about curation, Alation also shows the popularity of a table based on the query log ingestion from that data source. And a database may have 2,000 tables, but maybe only 150 are really being used. And so when I talk about curating and getting to 100%, I'm focused on those tables that have actual usage, not the entire data set. Now, over time, we expect we will get to the entire data set, but as we all know, there are system tables, there are temp tables, there are tables that may have been intended for use that were never used, or tables for a part of the system that you don't use that don't make sense to curate. So when you think about curating, think about curating those popular tables, which Alation shows you right in the system, which ones are most popular.
Great, thanks Pat for that very comprehensive answer. I'm going to present a couple of slides. I do see some other questions coming in. We'll get to a few questions at the end here, so keep populating them. But I'm gonna share how some of what Pat applies we've seen actually as broader best practices across a variety of industries who are adopting data catalogs. As folks on the phone have either had the experience firsthand in starting to build a data culture, or have been reading up in the market about how data catalogs are becoming central to curation and stewardship and self-service data usage and building a data culture, you probably have come across some data points, either in your own personal experience or in the market, as to just how hard it can be to do what Pat has accomplished so far at Avista and start to really change the organization and how they're using data. This is a quote from New Vantage Partners in a recent survey they did, taking a look at the adoption of data and AI technologies. They've run this survey for 3 years. So they have a good understanding of how technology adoption is increasing in these areas of data and analytics, but that most businesses still feel like they're on the journey to create that data culture versus having accomplished that. And so some of the perspectives that Pat has shared with us about change management and getting the organization involved, providing incentives for analysts and stewards to curate data is just as important as the technology to be able to change those human behaviors around data. And so what we're seeing now is that this new technology and data cataloging is starting to make a difference. It's starting to help organizations give a central point of reference for all the context that they need around their data so that their usage of Cognos and Alteryx and Tableau can be more effective in leading to decisions in the organization. We see this trend happening across a wide variety of industries. So we've talked today quite a bit about electricity and gas and some of the new and innovative business outcomes that are being driven by data. But we see organizations from financial services to retail to pharmaceuticals to software and technology adopting data catalogs. This is not a comprehensive list, but a representative list of the different industries and companies that have adopted Alation as a data catalog in the market. And there are several other vendors, as Pat mentioned. He looked at several vendors before selecting Alation as his data catalog. So there's several other vendors who are also selling into organizations like these in the market. Data catalogs are starting to become pretty broadly adopted. And what we see is that there's often a natural progression in adoption and in the types of business outcomes that organizations are seeing with data catalogs. The most immediate business value or outcome often starts with those individual analysts who, in Pat's case, were involved in the proof of concept, but in some organizations get their hands on the tool post-adoption. And those analysts are typically seeing a 20 to 40% increase in their own personal productivity in using a data catalog that makes it easier to find the data they need, understand all of its nuances in detail, and then begin to use that data through their business intelligence and analytics tools. Once an organization gets that initial productivity boost from the data catalog, we see many organizations moving to the next step of curation and stewardship and using the data catalog to link to their data governance program. And the advantage there, the data catalog, is speeding up that data stewardship process, using machine learning to make proactive recommendations, as Pat pointed out, and to really help to drive some of the incentives and create a foundation for faster documentation of the data and stewardship programs. And then organizations are also using data catalogs to prove the value or monitor or track the value of their data assets. And the value there that they're often seeing through that process is more consistent reuse of what the engineering or IT organization has already defined, or maybe self-service users have already defined as data assets. And so there's a value that's coming back to the business with consistent reuse that cuts back on the time spent on the hamster wheel of creating new data assets in their platforms. So those are three very typical types of business outcomes that folks are seeing from adopting the technology across a wide variety of industries. I have a couple of examples here. This one from financial services, an insurance company, American Family Insurance, that's talking about, in their case, the data transformation they're going through of creating a data culture. And at the same time that they're creating this data culture, they are moving some of their technology to the cloud. So American Family Insurance is using Alation to help track that cloud technology and help make sure that in that transition, every individual in the organization has access to their data. Pfizer is another example of an Alation customer in the pharmaceutical space who has ensured that the data catalog is playing the role as complementary to their data science tools and complementary to their use of Tableau, and ensuring that you don't have to be a data scientist to actually get access to data and be able to apply it to decision making, that the data catalog lowers the barrier of technical expectations for access to data and the ability to have the full context as you're navigating data in technology like Tableau. So that's helped them with the productivity of their individuals and getting to data-driven decisions. And Hilton, another Alation customer, is here maybe has the most quantifiable statement of how a data catalog has assisted them in getting broader usage of data and analytics. After a year's worth of usage of Alation in concert with their business intelligence tools, including MicroStrategy, the chief data and analytics officer was able to quantify for the organization that the data and analytics team delivered $105 million worth of value to the business within that year, more than they expected they would be able to do with that technology. So those are a couple of different snapshots of ways that organizations are quantifying their return on investment from a data catalog. Those customers also have advice for getting started in adoption and getting started in using this technology as a foundation for enriching the organization's journey to data culture. American Family Insurance would suggest that you should really think about moving from a culture of just reporting and metrics to thinking about a culture of analysis, where there's a curiosity to uncover new trends and insights. And that's helped them align their organization behind key data initiatives. Pfizer would talk about selecting tooling that supports that, that engages folks in that in collaboration across teams, so that curiosity is not just held by an individual, but becomes a shared driver of uncovering new insights that lead to innovation and new product discovery. And Hilton would suggest that you do track closely, use the data catalog to track the business impact or how different data assets are used to develop analytics that then generate business impact, so that those data initiatives start to snowball and get a mind of their own. So those are three other organizations, in addition to Pat, that have headed down this journey of adopting a data catalog as central to their data culture initiative and are really ensuring that all users of data in the organization, all business decision makers have access to data, so that data thinking actually becomes business thinking in their organization. We do have just a couple minutes left for maybe one or two additional questions. If you are interested in more information outside of Avista's use case, please do go to our website and this link, alation.com/customers, where you can hear the stories of additional organizations and how they're adopting a data catalog. So it's very hard, Pat, to pick one final question for you. I think that, if there was anything to share, we've got a couple questions asking, how the organization was valuing Alation, how you were keeping motivation to move forward. If there's anything that you can share about return on investment, or your path to making sure the organization at the end of the day has seen the impact of this technology that you could share, I think it'd be welcome.
Sure. I think the biggest thing to keep in mind is the organizational change management that's going to have to go along with this or any initiative that you undertake. And what we do to keep people engaged, of course, we have these weekly meetings to get things kicked off, but then we have monthly lunch and learns where we kind of combine our Tableau and our Alation lunch and learn together, and we invest a couple $100 a month in pizza because food always tends to get people there, and analysts come and share their stories, their successes, their findings with others. And so that's one way to keep things moving and keep people engaged. We also use we have Yammer inside the company, and so we are constantly publishing information out to those that subscribe to the Data Science Yammer group. We publish articles into our electronic news that goes out every Wednesday. We don't publish every week, but we did a series of 7 articles 7 weeks in a row, and we'll kick out another one series in the fall. That we did that in the spring. And so it really is engaging the people. Think about how it impacts them. The technology works. It's solid. It's fantastic. The challenge is, how are you going to get people to embrace it and use it?
Thank you, Pat, for sharing so many lessons learned. It's been a wealth of knowledge on today's webinar, and I know folks have enjoyed it and been very engaged. That is all we have time for today, but for folks who are still on the phone who would like to listen to the webinar again, or maybe share it with a colleague, please look for an email in your inbox. All individuals who registered will receive a link to the replay of today's webinar. And thank you very much for your engagement, and Pat, most of all, for sharing your knowledge and the lessons you've learned with the rest of our audience. Really appreciate your time.